Okay, take two. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory. And this is a bit of a big episode, so feel free to hit like and subscribe. I'm going to get that out of the way right away. Because you know what? You're probably not going to have Joe Rogan talking about stuff like this. In fact, even a lot of left leaning podcasters and political commentators themselves have been a little quiet on this topic, which is strange because a lot of them, I think they would care about this, but it's one of those things that just isn't discussed much. And in fact, I feel a little bit guilty about not doing an episode like this sooner because it's really an important episode. You see the title there. I'm talking about Nazi era history, Trump financing, and ice profits, and the Deutsche Bank. So, for decades, Deutsche Bank has faced scrutiny not only for its modern financial dealings, but also for its extensively documented role during the Nazi era. Yes, that Nazi era. The big one. And that history has resurfaced a little bit because of the bank's long financial relationship with Donald Trump and its indirect connection to the expansion of U.S. immigration detention infrastructure through subsidiaries tied to ICE facility development. So when I say indirect, I mean I mean in a technical sense. There is still some direct link there, but it's through a little bit of a proxy thing, and they come up with these weird terms for these subsidiaries to kind of distance themselves from what they're actually a part of. So don't get it twisted; they're still involved to some extent, but it legally will make it appear as if they have indirect connections to what is going on. So let's look at Deutsche Bank and the Nazi regime. Historical investigations, including research commissioned by Deutsche Bank itself, meaning you could actually go to their website and read their own information about this. But anyway, it has been documented that the bank's involvement with the Nazi state happened during the 1930s and 1940s. According to the bank's own historical archive and independent scholarship, Deutsche Bank helped finance companies involved in the construction of the Auschwitz concentration and extermination complex, as well as the adjacent IG Farben industrial plant. So keep that in mind. Auschwitz is kind of a big word when it comes to the history of fascism. And the bank also participated in the so called Aryanization process, through which Jewish owned businesses and financial institutions were forcibly transferred into non Jewish ownership. In other words, they were stolen. So, the bank handled accounts linked to the Gestapo and participated in transactions involving gold looted from Holocaust victims. And in the post war period, Deutsche Bank eventually acknowledged its role and participated in compensation initiatives for forced laborers and other Nazi victims through the German foundation titled Remembrance, Responsibility, and Future. So you might think, okay, maybe they're trying to have a redemption arc here. But the problem is, it's debatable if they should have ever been allowed to have a redemption arc. If a bank ever deserved a death sentence, I would say that Deutsche Bank probably did. If you're found guilty of participating in crimes like those, you probably should not be able to exist as a business anymore and all that kind of stuff. But let's look at the more recent history, how Deutsche Bank has become Trump's lender of last resort. So, investigative journalists have frequently pointed to Deutsche Bank's willingness to continue financing Trump after many major American banks backed away from him following multiple casino bankruptcies in the 1990s and early 2000s. Over roughly 2 decades, Deutsche Bank reportedly extended more than $2 billion in loans to Trump and Trump Organization projects. Those loans helped finance properties including golf resorts, hotels, and major real estate developments. So the relationship became especially notable because many large Wall Street institutions reportedly viewed Trump as too risky to finance during that period. And Deutsche Bank's real estate and private banking divisions nevertheless maintained the relationship even after internal disputes and litigation between the bank and Trump connected businesses. So, following the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack, yes, that one, Deutsche Bank announced that it would no longer pursue new business with Trump or his companies. But that appears to be an empty promise, as figures involved with the bank actually remain in Trump's orbit. So they might have, officially distanced themselves from him, maybe for legal reasons or something like that. Maybe the public relations nightmare at the time pressure them to do it. But let's look at some of these key Deutsche Bank figures connected to Trump. Several Deutsche Bank bankers became central figures in Trump's financial orbit. You've got Rosemary Vrablic, and I looked into it. That is basically how her name is pronounced, I think. Anyway, Rosemary Vrablic served as Trump's longtime private banker at Deutsche Bank. She helped structure hundreds of millions of dollars in loans tied to Trump Organization properties, including financing connected to Trump. While the larger bank distanced itself over murky legal details, Vrablic's private banking unit stepped in to supply the Trump Organization with massive financing, eventually issuing hundreds of millions of dollars in loans for properties like the Doral Golf Resort in Miami. And the extensive intertwining of personal and commercial finance drew heavy regulatory attention. Deutsche Bank launched an internal investigation into Vrablic in 2020 after it was revealed that she and two colleagues purchased a Park Avenue apartment in 2013 from a company in which Kushner, Jared Kushner presumably held a stake. And Vrablic resigned from the bank on December 30th, 2020, and was later suspended and barred for failing to cooperate with their investigation. But she's still in Trump's orbit. You've also got Justin Kennedy. Now, Justin Kennedy is the son of retired Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. He reportedly played an important role in Deutsche Bank's real estate capital markets division during the period when the bank approved large loans to Trump projects. During his tenure, the division dispensed well over $1 billion in loans and financial commitments to Donald Trump, funding developments in Chicago and New York. Kennedy reportedly worked directly with Trump and his family during his tenure at the bank. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, after a string of business bankruptcies, Trump was deemed a Donald risk by most major Wall Street institutions, making Deutsche Bank a crucial source of capital for his operations. When Justice Anthony Kennedy abruptly announced his retirement from the Supreme Court in 2018, creating a vacancy filled by Donald Trump, the timeline sparked intense public speculation. So critics questioned if the justice's retirement or decisions were connected to his son's past business dealings. Now, a lot of people denied that, and it might not be the case, but it was an apparent conflict of interest. And guess what? You're not supposed to have conflicts of interest. So that's why before on this podcast, I have sort of joked that a Supreme Court justices should sort of be forced to live under a glass dome and they should be separated from their families. That should be the price of being Supreme Court justice. So nothing in the outside world, like a family connection or a business connection, can corrupt your judgment. Now, that was kind of a joke, but this is a little bit a sign of why maybe that isn't such a joke. You should maybe have these powerful figures sequestered. I believe that's a correct word anyway, to prevent them from being compromised. You don't want even the appearance of corruption in a trial, or at least that's how things used to be when it came to these sorts of decisions. But nowadays, I guess the Supreme Court and the justice system has just been so corrupted that it's almost a joke to even think of them trying to have integrity at this point. Of course, by now it seems like few Supreme Court justices would ever recuse themselves over such relationships anyway. But the point is, this Justin Kennedy was a person who was apparently in Trump's orbit. And then you've got the Kushner companies and Ivanka Trump. So Deutsche Bank also maintained extensive financial relationships with Kushner companies and accounts tied to Ivanka Trump. Vrablik and her team reportedly managed lending relationships for multiple members of the Trump Kushner family network simultaneously. Rosemary Vrablik and her wealth management team at Deutsche Bank served as the primary centralized point of contact for the Trump Kushner family network, facilitating hundreds of millions in loans across the president's and his son in law's respective business empires. So, lots of connections here. And Vrablik's division managed personal and business lending for Jared Kushner and his relatives. This included multi-million dollar lines of credit and hundreds of millions in commercial financing, such as a $285 million loan to refinance the Kushner owned retail and office building in Times Square, as noted by Mother Jones. And I guess I should mention this. Jared Kushner is Jewish, right? That's common knowledge. So you might have to wonder, like, even though I'm not Jewish, right? If I was a Jewish person, why would I want to do business with a bank that had a very obvious Nazi affiliation? I think I would try to choose a different bank, maybe one that didn't have such a well established uh, bloody history and all that. One that maybe didn't have as much shame associated to it. But I guess that's not a scandal for some people. I don't know, especially in this day and age where there's all this talk about increase in anti-Semitism, and if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me that, like, if you're a business person and you're Jewish and you have a lot of business ties to this Nazi affiliated bank, that seems like it'd be about as bad as, I don't know, criticizing war crimes by the leaders in Israel. I don't know. That seems like it'd be a controversial thing to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy here. Maybe I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I don't know. But I guess I just see things a little bit differently. Me and Jared Kushner, I don't think we'd see eye to eye on a lot of different things, and this, I guess, would be one of them. So let's get into another aspect here: the ICE detention expansion and the Salt Lake City warehouse deal. And this is because in 2026, that's this year, mind you, Deutsche Bank's name returned to controversy through a major real estate transaction involving ICE detention expansion in Salt Lake City. Well, you might not just call them detention centers, you might even call them concentration camps, especially when, hey, guess what? The Deutsche Bank is actually connected to actual concentration camp construction. So it seems like, the ability to say, oh, you're too mean to ICE, you shouldn't be calling them fascists, they're not actually concentration camps, they're just, detention centers. It seems like that loses a little bit of its luster if they have any ties to actual Nazi banks. You know, that seems like that seems like something that should be put into consideration here when it comes to how lenient we should be in our criticisms of ICE and their rotten, evil facilities. But anyway, in March 2026, the Department of Homeland Security, as they call it, purchased an 833,000 square foot warehouse property for approximately $145 million. ICE intends to convert the site into a large immigration detention facility, reportedly capable of holding thousands of detainees. And I'm sure they've already started to, you know, uh, try to make this into a functional facility. I mean, to the extent these places are functional, I mean, they're kind of designed to be cruel to their inhabitants. And public records identify the seller as, and I'm this is like a hard to say thing because it's convoluted, and it's like they're trying to hide that they are facilitate or that they are linked to Deutsche Bank. But anyway, the seller is RREEF CPIF 6020 W300S, LLC. And it's an entity managed through RREEF, the real estate investment arm associated with DWS Group. So, according to the official DWS Group corporate governance documentation, the sole general partner of DWS is a wholly owned subsidiary of DB Beetlegungs Holding GmbH, which is 100% owned by Deutsche Bank AG. So that's a lot of like sloppy sloppy pronunciations there. But the point is, it seems like they're trying to semi hide their associations with Deutsche Bank. But the ICE facility does have links to Deutsche Bank, and historically, Deutsche Bank acquired the RREEF real estate business unit directly in 2002 before integrating it alongside its retail mutual fund brand DWS. So that all is a bunch of gross sentences to say. Like, it definitely sounds like I'm saying a foreign language, and I think that's the point of this kind of shit, to be honest. It's deliberately confusing. There's a bunch of like RREEFCPIF 6020. Like, nobody wants to say those things. Like, they don't sound right. And it'll go in one year and out the other. And that is to obscure the connection to Deutsche Bank. And some people would probably say, oh, that's not why it's done. But I'm pretty sure that's exactly what the intention is here, because people will read that and it'll just look like weird code language. And it's not the way normal people actually talk, and all that kind of stuff. So it's very convenient for concealing the links to this sinister bank. And although DWS was spun off into a publicly traded asset management company in 2018, Deutsche Bank has continued to retain a majority ownership stake in the firm, as noted by an article on Yahoo Finance. And I'm gonna open that link here. It's called While Individual Investors Own 11% of DWS Group, public companies are its largest shareholders with 79% ownership. And so it says in that article the largest shareholder of the company is Deutsche Bank with a 79% stake. So it really is like they're trying to hide this. So make no mistake about it. there is an attempt. They know how bad it would look, so they are trying to conceal it. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. The deep connection is frequently reaffirmed by executive appointments, such as the appointment of DWS CEO Stefan Hoops to Deutsche Bank's management board to oversee group level asset management. Obviously, it is objectively true that Deutsche Bank linked entities financially benefited from the federal government's purchase of the ICE designed property, or the ICE designated property. Sorry, I shortened that word. Um, but so it really is like they're trying to conceal it. They're trying to hide it. But I want more people to be talking about this. I want this to become more of a big deal. And you can share this episode if you want. Even though, yes, my podcast is not the most popular, it doesn't have the biggest numbers, but definitely, spread this information far and wide. It's not you being paranoid. This is all documented. Like there's that article from Yahoo Finance. If you do a Google search, you can find it. And, they're trying to hide it through these sort of offshoots. And, it's strange, but it's true. And local reporting and public officials confirmed the accusation or the accusation, the acquisition and the plan to transform the warehouse into an ICE detention site. Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall publicly opposed the proposal, calling the project inhumane and pledging to resist its development. So some people are paying attention. It is getting a little bit of coverage, but there needs to be more of an ethical and political backlash. The warehouse deal has generated sharp criticism from immigrant rights activists, local residents, and human rights organizations. Some opponents explicitly invoke Deutsche Bank's Nazi era history while protesting the project, and the bank's historical association with authoritarianism and detention infrastructure. It makes its modern financial involvement in immigration detention especially troubling because, well, we know what happened in the, in the original uh, fascist era in the 1920s through the 40s. A lot of bad stuff happened. A lot of people died because of these types of uh, these immigrant bashing campaigns. And you also have to question the price paid for the facility. Reporting on the transaction noted allegations that DHS paid substantially above asserted value for the warehouse, intensifying concerns about taxpayer spending and private profit connected to detention expansion. So you've got a scandal layered on top of the already scandalous existence of the Deutsche Bank and these ICE facilities. You've also got, not just the possibility, the obvious likelihood that some people are making out like bandits from these deals. And there has been some attention drawn to this. Uh, and activists have targeted lenders connected to private prison and detention operators such as Core Civic and GEO Group. And this is including campaigns criticizing Citizens Financial Group for extending large lines of credit to detention related corporations and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like nobody's paying attention, but obviously people should be paying attention, even just based on Deutsche Bank's twisted history. So this is really a continuing debate over corporate responsibility as well. And there's a reason that some people say, corporations are bad, corporations are evil. It's not it's not like corporations just do good things. If they just did good things, I wouldn't have a problem with them. I wouldn't have any critiques. I'd just be like, "Oh, it's a business. It's providing goods and services that I enjoy." It's not building fascist concentration camps. I'd be fine with if they were just regular businesses and employees were treated well and the consumers were treated well and everybody was just happy and it was all sunshine and lollipops and puppy dogs and butterflies and all that kind of stuff. But no, it's more dark than that. And Deutsche Bank ultimately, the scandal extends beyond a single real estate transaction or a political relationship. You know, it's something that is much darker than that. And as ICE detention capacity expands and scrutiny of corporate involvement grows, Deutsche Bank's past and present remain deeply intertwined in public debate over finance, state power, and historical accountability. And honestly, people like us are going to be part of the attempts to hold these businesses accountable. You know, we're going to be the ones, even more than politicians, more than uh, more than even coordinated campaigns. If we keep on spreading these uh, bits of information, if we keep on doing research and verifying our facts, and mentioning these things to people that we know, and sometimes if we can bring them up to people in the media and hold people accountable in public, I think that should be done. And this episode is my attempt to do that. Even though I'm living in the middle of nowhere, I'm still trying to have a little bit of influence. And hopefully, you help in that effort and you let people know what is up with Deutsche Bank and these ICE facilities and Trump's obvious links, the conflict of interest, all that kind of stuff. Jared Kushner's twisted involvement in these Nazi banks and bankers and whatnot. So there are other banks that have history with the Nazi regime, and I'm not meaning to sidestep that either. You might want to look into that. Maybe I'll do a follow up episode on that. But I feel like I've said plenty already, so let this be like the starting gun for the race to find out more information on these deviant interests that are ruining the world and bringing hell on earth in the United States and beyond.